numerous extracts exist out there that can deliver specific flavor notes to a treat, a food, or in some cases supplements. In terms of the probiotic side of things, these are live yeast, and similar to the probiotic, the most challenging component of that is in dealing with the processing and identifying yeast strains that will survive the passage of the GI tract to get into the lower GI to deliver a benefit.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, powered by Wisenetics, your trusted source for the cutting-edge science and insights driving the global pet food industry forward. Whether you're a nutritionist, a product developer, marketer, veterinarian, or decision maker in the pet food space, this podcast is your go-to for staying competitive and informed. From emerging research and regulatory shifts to ingredient innovation and sustainability trends, we cover what matters. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shoveler. I'm a professor of companion animal nutrition at the University of Guelph, and I have a background in comparative animal nutrition and 2 decades of experience working alongside industry partners. Let's dive into today's episode and explore the differences between yeast and other bacterial probiotics with Russ Kelley from Phileo Lesaffre. Russ Kelley is an alumnus of Auburn University of the Department of Animal and Dairy Sciences, where he earned his BS and MS degrees. Russ joined Phileo by Lesaffre in 2023 as Global Program Manager, in particular focused in pets, where he leads marketing and strategic planning and provides technical support for the pet division. Russ has a long history in R&D with the Iams Company, P&G Pet Care, Mars Pet Care, and Royal Canin, exploring improvements in maternal, neonatal growth and performance nutrition. And for full disclosure for all the listeners, Russ and I work together at P&G Pet Care, so this should be a pretty thrilling episode. Welcome, Russ.
Thank you, Kate. It is a pleasure to be here. It's good to see your face.
It's always good to be in your presence. Always learn something and always have a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to this. So let's dive right into yeast and bacteria probiotics. And I think you realize that we have had a lot of yeast people on the podcast. So I'm going to start first with asking you, what is the difference between yeast probiotics and bacterial probiotics?
Yeah, so I'm going to, basically just I'm going to say for all practical purposes, Kate, we have to remember that all probiotics, right, are live microorganisms that, when provided in adequate amounts, provide a health benefit to the host. So with that, they are, in fact, different microorganisms, but their goal is the same, and that is to deliver a health benefit to the host when consumed in adequate amounts. Now, with that said, they have very different approaches with regard to their mechanism of actions. And even within the bacteria range, as you probably know, not every strain of bacteria provides the same mechanism of action with regard to the health benefit. And we anticipate that yeast are going to be similar to that there's going to be different strains of yeast that will provide slightly different benefits. And it is up to us to continue to learn which strains are going to work best under certain conditions.
For more than 20 years, BioOrigin manufactures high-quality yeast-based ingredients through a sustainable biotechnological process, guaranteeing full traceability from the crop to the bowl. Through specialization in the fermentation process, BioOrigin brings the right solution for specific nutritional, palatability, and health appeals, such as gut health, immune system, skin health, weight control, and more. BioOrigin's products are natural origin, non-GMO, and certified sustainable by Bonsucro. BioOrigin is your partner for high-quality, yeast-based ingredients to add value to pet foods worldwide. Learn more at bioorigin.net.
Great. Well, can you also, for the listeners, delineate a little bit? Because as I alluded to, we've had a lot of people, a lot of companies on talking about yeast. And in particular, I always want to know what is the difference with their yeast. And we've had yeast extracts as an example. We have yeast with different compositions. Can you speak a little bit to where the yeast probiotics really lie in that yeast offering?
I'm going to say probably as you've learned from your previous guest, I mean, I'm going to say the most widely used components of yeast are going to be either A, from the yeast cell walls, which are rich in beta glucans and manooligosaccharides. So in terms of that, the postbiotic effect. And then the other side of that, you also mentioned in terms of the various nutritional profiles, is from a palatability enhancement side, right? Numerous extracts exist out there that can deliver specific flavor notes to a treat, a food, or in some cases supplements. In terms of the probiotic side of things, these are live yeast, and similar to the probiotic, the most challenging component of that is in dealing with the processing and identifying yeast strains that will survive the passage of the GI tract to get into the lower GI to deliver a benefit. I'm going to say for within the pet business for us, right? Our yeast probiotic, we specifically selected a strain and identified processes to really enhance the stability of that yeast when applied to either a dry kibble or a dry treat post-extrusion. It will not survive extrusion like many probiotics. So you do have to have some processing considerations. We utilize this strain and some enhanced processing approaches to where we get, a very, very good stability when it's applied post-extrusion to a dry kibble, which is, really a good key in terms of being able to commercially apply it. In terms of that, we, 18 to 20 months when applied post-extrusion to a dry kibble, and with that said, that's a first step. We know that it's going to survive on the kibble. We know it's going to survive the passage of the GI tract, and now we're just really honing in on where does this best apply with regard to instilling a health benefit to the animals that consume it. In what cases is it going to perform the best?
Okay, so since you're talking mainly about extruded food, and you're talking about at the very end of kibble production and the enrobing, they would have to have the capacity to enrobe that probiotic with everything else. Does that then mean that what about the other formats of food, such as wet, raw, lightly cooked, freeze-dried? What are your thoughts about live yeast being incorporated there?
Certainly any of the high moisture matrix is going to be I'm going to say a non-recommended use from a standpoint that the yeast are going to become activated metabolically in the moisture of the product, and thus not likely to not be alive when the animal consumes it, because it's metabolically become active, utilized up the substrates, and going to be, in terms of that, it's going to turn into a very expensive postbiotic material. Right. So in terms of that, we still need to do some evaluations as to, I'm going to say, some of the, freeze-dried materials. We anticipate that it would be successful in those, but we haven't currently tested in that matrix. But anything that would have minimum or minimize in terms of free water activity, we feel pretty confident that it's going to be successful.
Okay. And then when you're supplying the live yeast probiotic, in contrast to yeast extracts, you also get all the postbiotic benefits of that same yeast while you're getting the live benefits as well, correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah. In terms of that, there's going to be in terms of, like, particularly for our product, one of the drying steps we go through is, it is not an encapsulation, but it is, we do sacrifice a certain percentage of the live yeast to coat the live yeast. And those dead yeast, we basically utilize those as a buffer against any residual free water or any hostile components like minerals, any of the oxidizing components. We use those dead yeast as a buffer to preserve the live yeast inside the sort of conglomerate.
So you encapsulate live yeast with dead yeast.
It's not a true encapsulation, but yes, in terms of that, we call it micropurling. And
okay.
And with that, the particles themselves, they sort of look pearl-like,
okay.
But in terms of that, it is the vast majority of the yeast are still alive, but we do sacrifice a component, and certainly those dead yeast would then become postbiotic available along with the live yeast once they die.
Okay, interesting. So as we think about differentiating, because there's not a probiotic on the market that I'm aware of that will survive extrusion either. So it's all the microorganisms fall into this category. So when we think about that, what are the differences in the primary benefits between the live yeast probiotic, or the live yeast probiotic from Phileo, and bacterial probiotics as an example? And it's strain dependent. I understand that. So you might have to dimensionalize some of the bigger probiotics that are on the market in terms of what their benefits are versus what the benefits of Phileo's live yeast is.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of that, if we, and this is not to say that one probiotic is better than another, really, in terms of that. When we tend to think of like the bacterial probiotics, certainly the literature suggests that, pretty consistently those bacterial probiotics deliver a management scheme with regard to balancing the microbiome, or promoting a nice balance within the microbiome. Where we tend to start favoring yeast probiotics would be they tend to be a little bit better in promoting sort of the immune support side of the probiotic actions. Another thing in terms of that, if we look at like yeast are non-colonizing, some of the bacteria are colonizing with regard to the GI tract. We tend to think of yeast or bacteria as being, let's just say, adhering to the GI tract lining. The yeast do not bind or adhere to the yeast cell, the gastrointestinal cell walls, but they do interact and communicate specifically through some of the post components that you mentioned, whether that be the monooligosaccharides or the beta glucans. They do interact, but it's not a true binding or adhesion to the intestinal cell wall. And in terms of that, certainly from most bacterial probiotics, they elicit their response through metabolites. So they produce specific metabolites that then influence the environment, where the yeast probiotics are interacting, I'm going to say directly binding to certain pathogenic bacteria, and then preventing them from interacting with the intestinal lining. So in terms of that, they are similar in a sense that they both promote health. It's just a little bit in terms of the mechanism slightly different. And as we're going to talk about later on, I think one of the big components is yeast are not sensitive to antimicrobials or antibiotics. Not that in terms of that, we hear a lot of concern about antibiotic resistant genes, which certain bacteria do contain. But with regard to that, the yeast do not contain these genes, but at the same time, they are not sensitive to the most common types of antibiotics. So thus, they remain effective during an antibiotic regime.
Oh, interesting. So one question that you spawned here is has anybody looked at combining yeast and bacterial probiotics?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of studies out there. We have not done this with ours, but there are, I'm going to say there are other yeast probiotics on the commercially available, and there have been, particularly on the human side, there's been some combination approaches in terms of yeast and bacterial probiotics provided in conjunction, and it does appear to be a synergetic effect, at least within the human literature.
Yeah, which makes sense given the description of the mechanisms that those would be complementary in nature. So if companies that are currently producing kibble, and we'll stay kind of focused on kibble and post-extrusion application, can you talk a little bit to the listeners about what those considerations are, what they're going to need in their plants in terms of the application, and what the considerations are kind of all the way until the kibble gets to the dog or cat's mouth?
I'm going to say one of the easiest approaches that we found to be effective would be to work with their palleting company. If they don't have internal blending operations themselves, they could work with their palleting company to produce either a dry palletant blended with the probiotic, or they could do it in-house. We do have data to support it can be a liquid palletant, but that does reduce down the long-term shelf life in terms of that. We can still get about 12 months, but it does reduce, if using a dry palletant, we can push that stability on out, 18 to 20 months. But if we use a liquid palletant, it will slightly decrease that shelf life stability in that 12-month range.
Sure, interesting.
Yeah. So and I think in terms of that, where this makes a lot of sense is really in terms of really thinking about these animals that are at high risk for receiving they're on a prescription diet, whether it be skin or whether it be GI challenges or poor oral health. We know that there is a group of animals out there that have a really high chance of sometime, once or twice or three times within the year, they have a high chance of having to be on an antibiotic. And I think in terms of that, if we look at studies we published, we had one earlier this year in February 2025, where we demonstrated that we can't completely erase the negative impacts of having antibiotic use, but we can mitigate, right? We can mitigate and reduce down the negative effect that the antibiotic regime will take. And I think, one of your co-hosts, Dr. Suchodolsky at Texas A&M, I think him and his group have clearly demonstrated that we know that antibiotic use dramatically alters the microbiome health, and that disruption doesn't resolve itself immediately, right? It can last multiple weeks after the antibiotic use ends. And I think in terms of that, when we look at like the percentage of animals that are going to get an antibiotic at least once a year, I think that depending upon the study you look at, somewhere we can safely say somewhere between 25 and 35% of animals that visit a vet clinic typically leave on an antibiotic. Whether that, and I think, whether that, I think, when we look at skin or ears, that's a big component these days in terms of where it's being used. GI, it's always going to be one that a lot of vets will turn to an antibiotic to try to resolve those GI issues. I think we're seeing some good movements by the veterinary community in terms of the topical versus systemic use, and which is, again, this is not a bad thing for the overall health, but I think in terms of these high risk animals, the yeast probiotic is a really, really good consideration for companies to take a look at and decide, we're going to take this approach with regard to the probiotics, because whether we're talking a bacteria or a yeast, right? We know that these approach is going to help reduce down the negative impact and help restore the GI tract to a healthy status following the use of an antibiotic. The one advantage here in terms of the yeast being that it can be just continually in terms of that. If you give a probiotic during an active use of antibiotic, it's going to take its impact. The antibiotic is going to take its impact on those probiotics the same as it is the other bacteria, right? In terms of the yeast, it's going to be able to continue to provide its benefit even through the antibiotic active period, and like I said, our study doesn't indicate that it completely takes away or prevents the negative impact, but it does strongly suggest that it is able to mitigate. And a few more studies down the road will be able to hopefully demonstrate that this mitigation turns into a faster recovery.
Well, that being said, Russ, is there that's the therapeutic application of yeast probiotics, but what about the prophylactic application of yeast probiotics? Is there any reason we think about the comorbidities that dogs and cats are presenting in, and you hit them? I mean, skin is a very common presentation, and people chase that in a lot of different ways. From, is it systemic inflammation? And that comes back to, are we talking about the immune response, which is highly variable among animals? But is there a potential role here in the prophylactic consumption of yeast probiotics to help avoid everything that yeast probiotics could still help with when you're being treated, but could you avoid treatment by taking yeast probiotics chronically?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, Kate, as you know, it's difficult to say that we could ever prevent an illness, right? But certainly we can take steps to try to put an animal in a more healthy state, or a healthier state, that they're better able to combat when they do have challenges. One of you sort of stimulate, I didn't mention it earlier, but when we were talking about differences between bacteria and yeast, I mean, one of the components that does tend to be a stress to yeast is sort of a decreased inflammatory profile from animals consuming yeast probiotics. In terms of that, it's the yeast probiotic is a fairly new approach in terms of the dog and the cat, but in livestock they've been long used and recognized as a good management tool with regard to challenging environments such as livestock production. And but in terms of the dog, particularly the dog, we have shown that at least our yeast probiotic does help sort of decrease the inflammatory profile of animals that are consuming it, which is again, that's a step in the right direction, not necessarily suggesting that we're going to prevent any illness, but certainly we put the animal in a better state to combat or recover from whatever challenges that may be presented with.
Okay, so First and foremost, you are suggesting the consideration of yeast probiotics in therapeutic diets for pets. But is there also an opportunity for supplementation of yeast probiotics separate from food?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of that, certainly, supplements are another option with regard to providing probiotics, whether that be a bacteria or yeast. It's ours. We anticipate it would be very stable, and we have put it into I'm going to say supplement type delivery systems for some of our studies with high success. But there's a specific development of selecting this line or this strain and doing the processing approach we've done. We really did develop this particular strain for the dry food or dry treat industry. Now that doesn't, certainly it can be applied in the supplement, and would be happy to really connect with anyone who has an interest in that in terms of developing what the effective inclusion rates would be for a supplement, or depending upon the dog size that they're targeting, or how many treats do they want to be a daily delivery. With that, we also work with the company that would be putting it into a dry matrix to make sure that we're using an effective inclusion rate to deliver an effect. So yeah, I think in terms of that, really, it's open to either approach, whether it be through a treat, whether it's a complete and balanced diet, or whether it be a supplement. We certainly anticipate we would be able to work with a group to help them put an effective product on the market.
All right. So if the listeners are now intrigued and want to explore the yeast probiotics from Phileo by Lesaffre, how do they get a hold of you?
So in terms of that, they can go to our website, Phileo by Lesaffre, and go on to the species group, select pet, and our contact information will be there. And we're happy to connect in terms of that. We're a global operation, so whether they're in the U.S., Canada, South America, Europe, Asia, doesn't really matter. I will point out that our probiotic is not approved in the EU at this point. We're still working with EFSA to get registration, but it's right now we're focusing on the North American market with this product.
Excellent. Well, I hope people reach out and at least take the opportunity to discuss a new incremental innovation in their foods if they want to bring in additional benefits. So thank you so much for joining me today, Russ. I really enjoyed our conversation. And
it's always good to talk with you, Kate. It's always great.
Just wait until my third question. I do have a few personal questions for you, though.
It's time for our famous three.
Okay, first and foremost, what do you do to maintain your gut health and your family's gut health? And you should also include any pets.
Yeah. So in terms of I guess me and my family, we do take we're big prebiotic people, and I will say I am a proactive traveler, right? When I'm going to be doing an extended travel, I do tend to utilize a commercial probiotic. In terms of the pets, I look for a really well-designed, I'm a simple kind of guy. I don't use a lot of treats. I don't use a lot of I'm going to say things outside of complete and balanced diet for my pets. I am a proponent of utilizing a canine probiotic period when I take my dogs in the fall and during bird hunting season. If we're going to be out on the road, I do give them that as a, I'm going to say, not knock on wood. I've never had a massive issue, but I don't really want one when we're either in a hotel or driving down the interstate. I really want to minimize the chance of a GI disruption, and so I do a couple of weeks before a trip. I start giving a probiotic, and then I keep that practice through a couple of weeks when we get home. And it was really one of those where I've been extremely lucky over the years never to have a major hiccup, but I don't want one, and so I use that as sort of a increased insurance policy, just in case they, in terms of that, we're going to a lot of times we're going to places we don't really know, and what standing waters out there, or what other kind of inviting treats do they find out in the woods?
What do they eat when you're not watching?
Absolutely. In terms of that, they're not on leash, so a lot of times they're out of sight. So what they're doing when they're out of sight, we can't tell. But in terms of that, I do use a commercial available probiotic capsule, and it's also available in paste if people want to try to figure out what it is. And it seems it's worked for many, many years for me.
Excellent. Love it. Preparation and prevention is always an important quotient of success, I think. I think I know the answer to this question already, since you've already alluded to it, but what is your favorite sport to do with dogs? And now that I think I know what your number one, I think I knew before anyways, what's your second favorite sport with dogs as well?
In terms of that, Kate, favorite is that one's an easy. I really enjoy the upland bird activities, whether that be actual in the field or just conditioning. I really like to watch the dogs work, and I I'm going to say second. I think any of the performance dog scenarios I enjoy, whether that be retrievers, whether that be sled dogs, whether that be police dogs. I really like to watch dogs work, and especially dogs that are great at what they were bred to do. In terms of that, in terms of that, I think it's one of those things where we really must feel lucky in terms of being able to work with dogs day in and day out. Right? There's not much better than being out in the field with a dog doing what it was bred to do and trained to do. And I think in terms of that, we've been lucky for a long time to be able to be part of this industry and to really watch it evolve in terms of just the sheer amount of advancements that's been taken place over the last 30 years.
So true. So that dovetails nicely into my last question. And I was going to ask you who your favorite colleague from IAMS was, but I thought that was really unfair with me being on the other side here. So instead, I'm going to ask you, because you have had a long history with IAMS. That's where we shared. I'm not taking anything away from any other places and companies that you and I have worked with and innovated with, but in the IAMS days, what do you think the coolest innovation or discovery that IAMS had?
I think the best work the best, most fun projects that I were ever part of was really in terms of sort of the DHA and puppy trainability work. I don't view that's any more important than some of the other work that was done. I just happen to have the I'm going to say have the grace of luck to be part of it, and it was really an exciting 10 years of effort, starting in terms of what was the impact from a maternal standpoint, all the way to demonstrating the impact on a puppy post weaning. So that was a very very enjoyable time of my professional life, and in terms of that, there was I'm going to say it was a special project in my heart.
Yeah. It was absolutely outstanding work. And we all now think a lot about DHA when we're thinking about developing puppies and kittens. So thank you so much for joining us today, Russ.
It is a pleasure. As always.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review because your feedback is invaluable. Until next time, this is Kate Shoveler signing off from the Pet Food Science Podcast.